Make sure it's in the off position. Like I said, regardless of the brand, after you've done a good visual check, you've checked nothing's hanging off, nothing's broken on the outside, the little buttons are present, the caps, the recoil's there, that the chain brake's not broken, and everything seems to be in place. After you've done a good visual, basically, one of the first things I'd do, I'd want to make sure it's got compression. I'd want to make sure the engine turns over. So I'd pull the recoil rope, and if it bounces like that, and it feels like it's got compression, great. If it pulls up really easy, then you could say there's no compression. Either that or there's a problem in there with the recoil. But if it's got compression like this, it's like bouncy as you pull it. Great. Another thing I'd then look for is, I'd turn it on its side and I'd have a look at the fuel. I'll have a look in there first. Normally as soon as you take the cap off you can smell whether the fuel's stale or whether it smells quite fresh. That could tell you that it might need a new fuel filter. You can pull these out and we'll just check the fuel filter. Because when we check the fuel filter, we'll know then whether it's been looked after recently. You can use a set of long nose pliers. What you're looking for down there is the fuel pipe. I found it's just there. Or you can use a pick like this. You could also use just a normal screwdriver, but what you basically want, you want to feel for that fuel pipe, and then once you know you've got it, just pull up like that. There we go, and there's the pipe along with the fuel filter. Normally the pipe will stretch enough for you to take the filter out. Okay, so there's the filter. What we want to do is make sure that pipe doesn't go back in on its own. We can pull the filter off like that, and a good indicator really is to blow in the top end of the filter there. That blew fuel out quite okay, so that's not really that blocked. The fuel itself in this one doesn't really smell old and degraded, it smells quite fresh. So we'll put that back on and we'll push it back in. There we go, that's got in. So we know at least on this particular saw that it's had fresh fuel in recently. The fuel filter's okay, and now we can look further. The next thing I'd look for, although the fuel's okay and so's the filter and there seems to be compression, I'd want to look inside this engine quickly to make sure there's no wear, no metal transfer, no scoring of the piston. Because sometimes there can still be a considerable amount of compression, but there's still scoring on the piston in the engine itself. So it's always best to have a look. Of course you don't want to buy a saw that has got a scored piston, because it won't be long before you have to buy new engine components, new pistons, etc. And that could run very costly. And it might be that you have to scrap the saw because it won't be economically viable to repair it for the cost of the parts. So let's have a look inside the engine quickly. There's a quick way we do that. We turn it round so we can see the exhaust. It's normally the same on most chainsaws. You've got an exhaust there that sits out, looking out to the front, and you've normally got a couple of nuts or bolts or something there that just holds them on. On this particular one, we've got 2 nuts and we need an 8mm spanner. You can quickly whip these off. I know it seems quite a lot before you buy something, but you really want to know before you buy it, before you part with your money really, that you're buying something that's worthwhile. Of course the person you buy it off might not know that the pistons are scored or anything like that, so they could be genuine in selling you something that they think's okay, but you yourself, you don't want to be wasting your money on something that will go wrong on you pretty soon, or that will be costly, or something you might have to scrap soon down the line. Normally if a seller's got nothing to hide, they won't mind you just quickly popping the exhaust off anyway and just doing these few checks. It only takes minutes. So let's pop this off so they're nice and loose now. So we take the front piece off the exhaust, a little stay panel there, and then the exhaust should come off. It should be nice and loose and it should just slide off. There should be a gasket behind this. There we go. Obviously I've managed to take that off as well without taking the top off to save some extra time. And then what we want to do is look down there. Now, when we look down there, we can see through, right through into the exhaust port, and we can see the piston there in the cylinder. And as we can see, that looks okay. There's no scoring there. There's no damage on the piston or on the piston ring. Okay, we'll have another look down there and see it working. I'm just turning the engine over there with this recoil rope, this recoil handling rope, and you can see it's all in good condition. And if we pull the piston down, we can see right in the back of the cylinder there, the back of the cylinder looks okay. Doesn't look scored, doesn't look damaged. And we can see the front of the piston there isn't damaged, not scored. Because it will be the front there that goes first, particularly if there's been an issue with fuel. If the fuel to oil ratio hasn't quite been strong enough, it's been a bit too weak. What can happen there is it's that area there that you're looking into that will be the first area that'll score. Basically, it'll be metal transfer due to heat. If there isn't enough oil in the fuel, then it'll start to get hot there and basically try and weld together. We call that metal transfer, and it causes scoring. I'll give you an example of what scoring is. Let me just put this to one side. There we go. If we look at this particular engine, this is another two-stroke engine. This is actually a strimmer. But this engine's evidently got scoring there. You can see all them scores running up the piston, over the piston ring, and you can guarantee the pot itself will be the same, the cylinder itself, the walls of the cylinder. What's caused this is a lack of oil in the fuel. And because this is the exhaust side here, this is generally the hottest running area. It'll be this area that goes first if it's a lack of oil. So that's something to look for. That's what we could have seen when we just had a look at our chainsaw. Right, well, we can put the exhaust back on now. Just make sure the gasket is in there, that fit between the cylinder and the exhaust. Obviously we want to respect the saw because it's not really ours yet. We haven't really paid for it yet, hopefully at this stage. We're just checking. So we put it back to its original state before we came. Now as far as the seller's concerned, it shouldn't be a problem you're doing these checks. After all, when you go to buy a car, you expect to lift up the bonnet, get under the car, you expect to do checks, you expect to be there for half an hour or more talking about the car. So it's always best that you're thorough with these as well, these chainsaws. The next thing I would do to check the saw, I would quickly just take this side recoil cover off to see if there's any play in the crankshaft bearings. It's just normally held on by 4 pins or so, depending on the make. This is an F-cone, this has got 4. Doesn't take too long to take off, just a matter of minutes. Okay, they're nice and loose. See if we can pull this up. Try and keep the bolts in there. This is the flywheel here, and what I want to look for is, I want to look for any up and down movement in the flywheel. So I'll get it and I'll each side and I'll push up and push down, push up, push down, and see if there's any movement there, up and down movement. Obviously there's going to be movement in a turning motion, but up and down movement. And in this particular one, there's no up and down movement. There might be a tiny bit, but no, I don't think there is. You've got the crankshaft there that goes right through. This obviously turns with the engine, and the shaft comes through the bearing. If there's any movement in that bearing behind here, allowing that shaft to move up or down, then the engine itself can lose pressure. On top of the bearing there are special seals, crank seals, that keep the pressure inside the engine. And if there's movement up or down, then the seals can't seal that pressure. Pressure escapes and the machine will never run right. If it starts at all, it will sound like it's running really lean of fuel and revving high then stopping, that sort of thing. It can't get the right air-fuel mixture inside the engine. So that's good, that's got no play there. We call it play, no up and down movement. And whilst it's off, we can have a look at everything else. We can look in there and we can see down, see if there's anything hanging off. There's the magneto there, the coil pack that creates the spark when the flywheel runs past it there. That all looks okay, that's all intact. Looks okay from this point of view. So we'll get the recoil again, and whilst it's off we can have a quick look. So I'll make sure that the bolts fall out okay if they do. Okay, we may as well look inside here on the underside of the recoil, and we can see there when we pull the recoil it turns there. These little notches on the gears here contact these starter pawls and allows for a ratchet action. So when you pull, this pulley here then actions that turning motion on these starter pawls. These are called starter pawls, and then turns the flywheel. So this all looks okay, and it's all springing back okay, nothing hanging off. The starter cable looks okay, starter cord, although that's easy enough to change. That can go back on. Now that's back on, I would check the other side. So we'll turn it round and check this side now. Now I don't always take this off when I'm checking this. It'll just create more work for yourself and more time, but you can just undo them 2 bolts and pop this off. What I do, I turn it upside down and I can see the chain now coming onto the sprocket. I can see what type of sprocket it is. I can see that the chain brake is there. It doesn't look like anything's burnt through. You can, like I say, take this off and check playing the crank bearings this side as well, because obviously it goes right through. Once I've checked that side, I normally just check this side this way. Be careful how you do this, and it's probably best to wear gloves, but you can gently move the chain to make sure the chain's moving freely in there, and you can see the sprocket moving down there. That's okay. Now you want to make sure this chain brake activates Under no circumstances would I recommend you use any saw or buy a saw to use without the chain brake working, because you're going to really have to have the chain brake working anyway. That means if you buy the saw and it isn't working when you buy it, to get this chain brake working again will be extra cost to you. So I'd always make sure the chain brake's working. On this particular one, it isn't. It's not actually clicking forward, it should click forward, and the chain, you shouldn't be able to move the chain like that. So that isn't actually working at the moment. So under no circumstances would I run this saw and use it. Far too dangerous to use it without a chain brake. Just bear that in mind. After looking at the chainsaw in the detail I have done so far and seeing that the engine's okay, I'd be more inclined to buy it. Other than the chain brake, I've looked inside through into the piston, that's okay. I've checked the play here, the movement in the crankshaft, that's okay. I've had a look at the chain brake. I'd be more inclined now to think that I was going to buy this saw. I would just check one last thing, and that is I'd just like to take this back off here to check that the carburettor is in there okay, doesn't look physically damaged, and the air filter, etc. I'll just take a quick look. On this particular one there's one screw there, but on various models there could be a couple of screws. On some there's just a turning action of a special lever or a knob. Okay, let's lift it off. It's okay. You can see the air filter here. Looks a little bit messy, but nothing more than can be cleaned up, and it looks like there's no damage to the spark plug cap. I would change a spark plug anyway if I bought it. I look down here and I can see the fuel pipes and the electric wires are all okay, they're present and correct. No damage, another pipe there. I may as well take the air filter off now I'm down this far so I can have a look inside the carburettor and up through the carburettor. For this one you just need a flat-headed screwdriver again for these two bolts here, these special bolts. This is the carburettor, let's have a look at that. You can see that looks okay. We'll pull the choke lever here. That's all moving okay. Pulling the throttle and everything's moving okay on the carb there. Doesn't look like there's any damage on that one. We'll put the air filter back on. Just have one last good look around all underneath to make sure there's no cracks, no fuel leaking anywhere. Make sure the AV mounts are okay, the anti-vibration mounts, they aren't broke. Sometimes they break across here or across here. Yeah, the trigger, all moving okay. The locking trigger there, the locking mechanism. Choke's pulling out, the on and off button's working. So those are the checks I do, and I've had success with those checks in the past, and I've bought a lot of chainsaws, believe me, and they've always been okay for me. I'm not saying I've covered everything. You could actually go to town covering absolutely everything on these chainsaws. You've got to think of time, but if you've done them basic checks I've gone through, you've got a good chance that everything will be okay. But of course I can't guarantee everything. They're just the checks I use, and whether you do actually get the saw running or not at the time, if you've done them checks, you could almost guarantee, give or take a few circumstances, that this saw will be okay with a little bit of TLC. You know that you've spent your money right. Thanks for watching, and I'll be putting more content on soon. Please get in touch with me if you need any further advice when you're buying a chainsaw. Thank you.